All right. I'm very glad to introduce our next speaker to you. We've had. I hope you agree with what I said at the beginning of the conference, that we've got a lot of giants in this field here this weekend talking to you, and experiencers here that are extraordinary and groundbreaking cases. Well, the person who's going to talk to you this morning is. We get dramatic. We get dramatic highlights. Yeah. This is one of those absolute quintessential cases, okay? And this is in 1975, Arizona logger, driving after a job with his crew. They saw a flying saucer UFO. The person who's going to speak to you in a minute, I'm sure you all know who he is, but I like doing the dramatic entrance, He was the only one that had the kahunas to get out of the truck and go take a closer look. And though the aliens were nice enough to invite him on board whenever he did that, much to the chagrin of his crew members, who freaked out and drove off the mountain. So those are really good friends that do that, leaving for dead with the aliens. And eventually they went back looking for him. Of course, he was gone. And he was gone for many days. So this is, his experience has been considered the most carefully documented UFO contact case ever. And whenever we were talking last night, it's like, I asked Travis, I said, can you imagine that you would be like, the poster child for, alien contact whenever you were standing in that phone booth after your experience. And he's had an amazing and miraculous journey. And he's going to share his feelings and his thoughts and knowledge about all this with you today. Join me in welcoming Travis Walton.
And they start arguing about what to do. And in the movie, it's just like it happened, that Mike stopped and said, look, we got to go back. And a lot of the guys said, no way, I ain't going back there. Well, in the movie, when Mike said, anybody who doesn't want to, go with us can wait here, nobody volunteered to wait there in the dark. Didn't you think that was kind of implausible, that they'd stand alone in the dark while Mike went back alone? They said, no way, we're not waiting here. And so they all went back, even though not all of them were real happy about it.
You folks to meet the actors who portray Travis and Mike in the film. The other man, I'm sure you'll recognize right off, is perhaps best known for his hole-in-the-head role opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2. He's the cop who won't die, but melts and gets split apart, everything else. But he's here, and he's in one piece. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome D.B. Sweeney and Robert Patrick. I think they like you.
This is Sergeant Reynolds from Criminal Investigations calling Lieutenant Frank Waters. Are you there, Lieutenant? Over.
Because it is true. Truth is a little stranger than fiction, as they say. And this is a good, solid script. And I like the boys. The boys are good. Of course, it's their picture, and I'm just kind of supporting them. But I like it.
To really relate to Travis and Mike, you and DB had to learn how to be loggers and...
Yeah, we were with the chainsaws out there logging, and I actually nearly took out a bunch of crew guys. I was supposed to aim it at the camera this way, and the lights and everything were here, and crew guys were here. And this is a huge tree, and I had it going, and I thought I had it aimed the right way. And next thing I know, it's going towards all these guys, and they're all running, they're screaming at me.
The whole energy of the cast came together pretty quickly. The first or second day we were in the room together, you could sort of look around, you know, oh, there's Craig Sheffer, yeah, he's Dallas, and Robert Patrick was already well into his thing, and it fell together very nicely.
Hey.
Hey, bud.
We said we do a little fishing when the contract's over.
When this contract's over, yeah.
Come on, it's what we need, one of our camping trips. Some hunting, some fishing, chasing bears.
Oh, yeah, I remember. You ran that bear up that tree.
Just trying to make friends.
How come you can't make friends with Dallas?
He's just jealous I can do something he can't.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
Reading, right?
Oh, I just play a sheriff who is a real character, Sheriff Waters, and he doesn't believe a word they say. He just doesn't believe in UFOs, and also he's never had a case he didn't solve, and it really gets to him because he's going to have one he can't solve, and it really bothers him. He doesn't believe a word about any UFOs.
You expect me to believe that a flying saucer came down and took your friend away to outer space?
That's the truth, mister. That's exactly what happened.
Is it? Is it?
And you know that, Blake. Why the heck aren't you speaking up for us? Why are you letting this man talk to us like this?
David, it seems like you're not even trying to believe us. We all saw the thing. We all saw the guy get zapped.
How about you, Mr. Dallas? You go along with that?
Oh, yeah, I go along with that.
You don't sound too sure.
Well, I'm sure.
Why don't you fellas tell Lieutenant Waters what you saw? Or what you think you saw?
It was Dallas that saw it first.
What about it?
Tell us about it. What'd you see? What did it look like?
It looked like a fire.
I won't be the guest of honor at the party tonight. You can find somebody.
You wait.
Oh, wait.
Your party life. And I hope you have a good time. I hope they treat you right. I won't be the
What in the hell is that?
Stop, Mike! Stop the truck!
Travis!
Travis! You son of a bitch! What the hell you doing? Get back in the truck, asshole!
Travis, whatever were you thinking about, boy?
Well, you'd have to know me back then.
What, a hellraiser?
Well, you know, I can explain what he did. You know, about three months before this happened, we had another little experience. He jumped out of the truck to chase a bear that ran across the road. And if you can explain that, you can explain this.
I'm not like that anymore. It's just,
You're not here.
you know, they're saying get back in the truck, and that was just kind of egging me on. I was scared too, but.
Hey, Mike! Travis, get out of there! What the hell is that? You feel that? What is it, Mike? Travis! Travis! Get the hell out of here! Get back in there! Travis! What the hell is that?
Everybody stay down. Yeah, it's an incredible experience playing these guys, I'll tell you.
Some of these loggers came back. One did not. You did not.
I played
your
Travis
character.
Walton.
Right.
I see the UFO, I get out of the truck, and just after what we just saw, I get zapped by a bolt of light, and I'm knocked unconscious. The other guys think I'm dead, and they take off. And then Mike realizes I've left my best friend there. I got to go back. And he comes back about 5 minutes later, and I'm gone without a trace.
The other loggers did not know what had happened to Travis, right?
Actually, we're all in the truck just going home from a work day. And we see it, we all see it. He wants to get a closer look and walks out underneath it. So the other guys that are with us in the crew cab, they all see it as well.
Yeah.
So we have like 6 witnesses.
Right.
And then as DB said, I go back with the guys and we look for him. He's gone.
And in real life, this group went back and reported him missing, maybe even dead.
Yeah. We knew he was missing. We thought he was dead. And we went back to the town and we explained to him what had happened. We knew that it was, it's a wild story, but we're sharing it with them, and they didn't want to hear it.
We've been telling you the truth since the beginning, and now we're ready to prove it. We'll take your damn lie detector test. You set it up, we'll be there. You go ahead. And if any of you got anything to say about me or my crew, you say it now. And you say it to my face.
Are you saying, Phil, that all 7 of these people are lying?
I'm afraid we have to say that on the basis of physical evidence.
Meaning?
Physical evidence that should have been there, but was not. Now, you heard Travis and Mike Rogers claim that this beam from the UFO was like a grenade exploding, fire, flame, that Travis was knocked 10 feet back, and in his book he claims he hit his shoulder against the rock. When the morning after this incident allegedly occurred, when the law enforcement officers went to the site to inspect, they found all kinds of dry pine needles, which, if this had actually happened, those needles would have been blasted away, they would have caught fire, they would have burned.
Why are you laughing, Travis?
Well, because this is typical of the sort of reasoning pattern this man uses in attacking all UFO cases. He's equating the absence of evidence to be the evidence of absence. That's absurd, and that's actually a logical fallacy.
It's necessary for people to know just exactly what Philip Klaus really is, who he really is. He's nothing more than a disinformation specialist from Washington, D.C.
What's the word?
The results of one of the tests was unusual. It's inconclusive. We'll have to try again tomorrow.
What about the other ones? What's the word on them?
The process is still ongoing. We never discuss the results till all the testing is complete.
Sorry, fellas. Come back down here in the morning, 9 o'clock sharp.
No.
What?
I said no. Look, we did what we said we'd do. We came in here like guinea pigs and let you test us, but that's it. We've had enough.
I ain't coming back again.
You're saying that you're no longer willing to cooperate?
That's all we do is cooperate. And all we get back from you is grief.
Mike, we need a little bit of time.
No, Mike, I'm sick of this shit. You want to press charges? You go ahead. You do it now. We told you everything we know, and if that's not good enough, that's too damn bad, because that's all there is. Let's get the hell out of here.
What are you saying, son?
Well, Blake, my charts don't lie. If you ask me, those boys are telling the truth.
I think we can be rather certain that this incident occurred, that they're not lying. What they claim happened did happen, and it's not a hoax.
The fact that I have to make the audience believe this extraordinary thing has actually happened to me, and if I can do that, it'll be a great victory for me, because it's not a matter of getting them to believe that your dog died or that your car won't start or that you broke up with your girlfriend. It's asking them to believe something quite extraordinary, a of biblical proportions, and that was what initially got my attention when I read the script, that central challenge of making, we're not making a special effects supernatural movie, we're making a movie about ordinary people where something extremely extraordinary happens.
You know, Robert, what about you? Are you a UFO believer, generally?
Well, if I can believe I'm a Terminator, I think I can believe this. Yeah, I've had the theory, I think that Carl Sagan said it best, that we'd have to at least, you know, we can't be that arrogant not to consider that there could be something else out there. So I came into it like that. And then after I met Mike and Travis and talked to them at length about what they had experienced, I totally believe their story.
You do?
Totally.
So you believe that there are creatures out there who are far advanced technologically over us and even come and visit time to time?
I believe that these guys went through a very traumatic experience. I believe what they've told me. And as I said, going into the movie, I've always had the idea that it is a small universe. And we are a tiny speck. So we have to at least be open-minded enough to consider the probability.
Travis Walton. Come on up here. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this gizmo to work.
Okay, how's my sound working? Hey, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming out on early on a Sunday.
Okay, all right.
How many people have heard me speak before? Okay. Quite a few of you, but I think there's enough of you who haven't that I'm going to go ahead and go through, what happened briefly, but I want to get on to some newer material that we have time for. November 5th, 1975, it was an ordinary work day. We'd put in a pretty long day. We were trying to, finish up the contract before snows would shut us out. So, we worked up almost dark, and we're headed out when we could see the. Let me see. How does this clicker work? A lot of people think of Arizona as being all cactus and desert, but we've got the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world there, and so the Mogollon Rim is one of the highest elevations in the whole area. From the contract, you can actually see San Francisco Peaks over there by Flagstaff, which is the highest point in the state of Arizona. It's pretty high elevation, which makes for pretty vigorous work at high altitude. And so in the movie, it gives the impression that we had been driving for some time, and some of the guys are kind of dozing off on the drive home, which we do because it was a half hour, 45-minute drive back to the house. But by the time we saw the light coming through the trees, it wasn't that long since we'd just been working. The point I'm making is that we were in a very awake state of mind, alert state of mind, because of the vigorous kind of labor involved there. So as we were driving along, everybody was, chattering away, different, little conversations going on. And so, in the film there it said, Alan saw it first, but I'm actually not sure who saw it first because it wasn't anything alarming. It wasn't like, hey, look at that immediately. It was just some little flickers of light that just kind of drew my attention in that direction. It's unusual to see any kind of light in the forest in the night, So, but it was deer hunting season. We'd been hearing some shots in the distance during the day, so I thought maybe hunters camped up there. You could tell, it was a pretty thick area. We hadn't cut the trees in this area yet. But I could estimate from the curve of the ground where the crest of the ridge would be that, it was coming from too high up to be campers. every kind of explanation just kind of went through our minds as we got closer. Thinking, well, could it be the sunset? No, that was a long time ago. Could it be the moon? No, there's the moon over there. And could it be a plane crash? Because by now it's becoming evident it was up in the trees. So the idea of fire came to mind, because we had, on occasion, been headed through the woods and found a tree that was on fire where it had been hit by lightning. That part of the country has the highest number of lightning strikes of any place in the continental United States, except for the Everglades. So, if you're walking along the top of the rim there, you're always within sight of a tree that's been hit by lightning. So that was where the idea of fire in the sky came from. Could that be a fire? And so, they'd come, and the Forest Service come and got us before to come and help them fight forest fire. They'd go get any of the woods crews, because we're experienced, we have the tools and ready to go to do that kind of thing. So that was probably uppermost in a lot of people's mind. But I said, Mike, hurry up, get up there where we can see, because I could see there was kind of a break in the trees enough to where the light was shining sort of across the road there. And I was sitting in front by the door. Mike was driving. Kenny was in the middle. Alan Dallas, he's in the upper right here, and he was sitting directly behind me. In the movie, there was only 6 of us, but there was actually 7 on the crew. And so as soon as we got to that place where the light was shining across the tree, the street road, there it was. Boom. I mean, it was unmistakable. The UFO skeptics, they always go look at the astronomy charts and decide which planet was most visible, and so they were trying to claim that this was the planet Jupiter, So, I mean, it was as close as from here to the back of the room. It was just, there was no mistaking. Alan yelled out, "It's a flying saucer," right off. I mean, it was just obvious. It was astonishing. I mean, we were just, the impact of just what was seeing that so sudden. Mike was kind of on the opposite side and had to look up at an angle, so the roof of the truck sort of obscured his view. He didn't really know what we were talking about, so I yelled at him to stop the truck, and he put on the brakes, skidded to a stop there. But I was thinking, this thing's going to take off, it's going to be gone in a flash. Because this, happens a lot. You're riding along and you spot a wild animal and you say, "Hey, look," and before they can even turn their head and look in that direction, it's gone. So I was just thinking this thing would be gone. I'd miss a chance to see it up close, and so I got out and headed towards it. Now, when I got out of the truck, I left the door open. I was just kind of on impulse thinking that. But the closer I got, I could see it wasn't taking off, and and those guys were getting very anxious and swearing at me and yelling at me to get back in the truck, and I became more and more scared and kind of slowed down. I was standing there looking up at it, and it was just an awesome sight. It was just, the other guys in the crew have described it as looking, frightening and beautiful at the same time. It was metallic, and parts of it were glowing, giving off light, but it wasn't so bright that you couldn't see. When we said it looked like molten metal, we were talking about like molten steel out of a blast furnace. When you see them pouring it out of those big things, it's white hot, kind of a yellow golden sort of a thing, but you can still see there's a surface there. in the movie they made it look like molten lava and stuff, but never mind the movie. They weren't interested in creating a documentary. But I was looking up at it there, and they were getting really anxious and calling me everything under the sun. And I was getting kind of scared myself, kind of scared. But suddenly it got louder, and it started to move. And it was just kind of an instant reaction for me to just jump for cover. There was some logging debris there. I jumped down behind a log. False security, being behind that. And those guys were pretty much screaming at me and cussing me out to run. And I didn't need to be told. I was just kind of debating whether it was safer to stay hidden behind this log or to get back to the truck. So I decided I was going to run back to the truck. I sort of half turned and straightened up. And before I could even take a step, I felt this numbing shock. It felt sort of like an electrical shock, you know, if you've ever touched a spark plug wire or something like that, but also kind of like a physical blow, you know, when you maybe got tackled in football and didn't see it coming. A real stunning force kind of thing. But very quickly I blacked out. Guys in the truck said it threw me 10 to 20 feet. And John said it was like there wasn't a bone in my body, like it's just a sack of meat. Said it just fell there. No attempt to, you know, break my fall or anything. Totally gone. And they said that they started yelling at each other, "He's dead, it killed him," you know. And they were just immediately certain. It was so violent that it had to be fatal. And so they took off. And good, you guys understand that. But you know what they had to deal with? People saying, "Oh man, you guys should have been more heroic than that, you know. Well, what a bunch of cowards to run off and leave your friend there." But, you know, it would have made no sense for them to get themselves killed to rescue a dead man. You know, to them, that was a foregone conclusion. So they took off. You know, Mike's primary job at that point was the safety of the remaining crew members. And so he dang near wrecked the truck, he said, getting out of there. They went up the road a ways and stopped and argued about it. And then they spotted some deer hunters, and they decided to go try to catch them, thinking get some help from somebody that's armed. No, there were no guns in the truck. And so they couldn't catch up with the deer hunters. So when Mike pulled over and he said, "Look, you know, we're going to have to go back." A lot of the guys in the crew, just like in the movie, said, "No, let's not do that. Let's just go get help." But says, "We got to go back. Anybody that doesn't want to go can just wait here." And in the movie, all the guys got out and Mike went back by himself. That's not the way it happened. The guys in the rest of the crew were not about to get out there and stand alone in the dark and wait for the truck to come back. They all opted to go back, and they were as they were headed back, they saw it take off, and but after that, they were still pretty scared. Not that it would come back, but you know, Kenny said the scariest thing was what my body was going to look like. They had argued about whether I had been blown apart, dismembered, or whether I was going to look all burned up and all charcoal. And so they said that was the scariest thing. I headed back. They found where the truck had spun out, taken off, and they said they went around and called and yelled and everything, and couldn't find any trace of me. And at one point, Mike fell to his knees and broke down and started crying. And you know, it's kind of funny how, you know, who could, you know, handle it from one moment to the next changed. Kenny helped him up, and Mike sort of regained his composure and sort of, took charge again at that point. He was overwhelmed with, the impact of what had just happened, and, he said, admitted he felt guilty for taking off, but I don't blame those guys at all, and I take exception to people calling them cowards because, they went back, reported it to the sheriff. The sheriff's men were immediately struck that something terrible had happened, but they thought maybe there had been some kind of a fight, maybe I'd been killed, and they come up with the craziest story to cover up for my disappearance. Didn't make much sense, but apparently the sheriff and the deputies preferred that over the alternative. Unlike in the movie, they did go back, half the crew went back with the lawman that night, did a little more searching, and then they got this massive search going the next day. They had over 50 men on horseback. This is where they met with the sheriff that night, and the sheriff and his men, said that they had been really checking out whether they had been drinking or not, but they didn't detect any odor of alcohol or signs of intoxication. Some of the guys were still crying. Mike had, kind of regained his composure, but, Steve was still crying, and maybe one of the, or two of the others, especially when they start talking about what happened. But they brought in the tracking dogs from the state prison. They were unable to find any trail beyond, from the edge of the road up to the middle of the clearing where my body fell. And they brought in people with Geiger counters. And Mike saw him doing the testing, and he went over there and asked him about it. And the guy, at that point was certain he was dealing with a cover-up for a murder. So he said, there's nothing here. See, this is just background radiation. It was 1.5 on the dial of the Geiger counter. And so he says, here's real radiation. He put it up to this radium dial watch this other guy had, and it went up to 3. And so they tested them in. They didn't get anything over background. So Mike says, we've bathed and changed our clothes. Let's get the hard hats we were wearing. So I went back to the truck and got them, brought them over there, and the Geiger counter went up to 6. That was double a radium dial watch. So that's a whopping dose of radiation. But the Geiger counter guy just gave him an angry look and wrapped up his thing and stomped off, And who that guy actually was is kind of funny too, because Mike had worked on these Forest Service contracts for years, and this guy, even though he was wearing a Forest Service uniform, Mike didn't remember ever seeing that guy before. So there were some outside UFO investigators who came in with Gauss meters and measured high magnetic readings in the clearing and a polarity reversal in the direction that the craft had departed. Well, we did some follow-up research on the radiation thing and discovered that the trees there in the clearing had suddenly started growing much more rapidly. And at the time it was first discovered, this was 15 years after the incident, and you could count one growth ring for each year and see, counting back 15 years, that suddenly these rings were so much thicker. But the core sample had been taken just on one side of the tree. Later, when a forest fire killed a lot of the trees in there, we were able to get a complete cross-section and discovered something else really interesting, that these thickened rings were on the side of the tree towards where the craft had been. Whether it was northeast, south, or west, the thickened rings were always pointed towards where the craft had been. And this was in some follow-up research that Ben Hansen supervised. He was the host of the TV series Fact or Fake. He's a former FBI agent. And he did some follow-up research online and discovered that the trees in the vicinity of the Chernobyl nuclear accident had started growing at 3 times the previous rate. And he did some other research and found several other scientific papers, which kind of runs counter to what you'd expect. You know, you'd think radiation kills things, so it'd shrivel up and die, but for some reason, at least in pine trees, it makes them grow faster. They actually explain the mechanism with these various types of xylem, phylum, and different layers of cells in the growth part of the tree. That this is, you know, pretty well established that radiation causes accelerated growth. During the search, they put a deputy with each of the crew members who were helping with the search, and you know, kept them under observation, so they might not go and, you know, cover up the blood spots or whatever they thought they might be doing. But they were, you know, each of these guys that were pushing at him, saying, "Come on, just tell us where you put the body, and, you know, we can all go home and cut out this nonsense." But things got pretty testy, and the men, you know, were said, "Hey, we're telling the truth. You know, we'll take any kind of test you want. Give us sodium pentothal, lie detector test, anything you want." So Sheriff Gillespie brought in the state polygraph expert. This is from the state police, Department of Public Safety, and tested the men, totally expecting to find that this was a cover-up for murder. And so everybody was really stunned when they passed. And at the time, the president of the American Polygraph Association said, you know, no one polygraph test is 100%, but when you have 6 people passing tests on the same issue, the odds are over 1,000,000 to 1 of there being a mistake. And so that was pretty tight. And Dr. Harder made the point that if you had that many people, even without lie detector tests, attesting that they had witnessed a murder, that would be an open and shut death penalty case. I mean, that would be enough to execute somebody. And yet, this, with even higher level of evidence than that, they passed lie detector tests, people were still in denial, trying to deny it any way they could. And that was with 6 tests. Right now, there's been 16 passed tests in connection with this incident. I've passed 5 different tests from 3 different examiners, all of them with the highest level of credentials, you know, like years of law enforcement work, you know, police officers, U.S. Marshals, state prison, all that kind of stuff. But when that energy hit me, I just was unconscious. And I didn't know anything until I started coming to, and I was in a lot of pain. I didn't know where I was. It was just real vague, and it was in and out for quite a while. I couldn't focus my eyes. That's what this slide's about. It's all blurry. That's blurry on purpose. But, you know, I felt like eventually I remembered, you know, approaching that craft, and then I started feeling scared that I'd been hurt and taken to the hospital, because something was definitely very wrong. I felt mortally wounded, you know, like something, like I was dying, you know, it felt really bad. A lot of pain, head and chest mostly, sort of a burned, crushed kind of a feeling. And I could hear the sounds of movement around me, and I just figured these were doctors. I could feel they had something over my chest. There was a light above me. And it was painful to look in that direction, but even though it wasn't real bright. But the main thing that was, you know, was this feeling of suffocation. You know, I felt like I couldn't get enough air. And in the movie, you know, they fictionalized most of everything that was in the stuff aboard the craft. But the one thing that I thought did an actual better job of portraying how I felt was the scene where that membrane is over the actor's face and he's trying to scream through it, he's struggling to breathe through it. And I think that illustrates for people the feeling of suffocation. You know, people can get it then, you know. If you just saw the actor breathing hard and looking panicked, you might, you know, not really understand the kind of panic that comes from the feeling of suffocation. This technique, interrogation technique of waterboarding, you know, some people have called it torture and you know, that we shouldn't do that, but, you know, our own guys have it done to them just as part of their training. Even the enemy does it to train for it, but it still works. The reason it still works is because there's nothing that generates fear like that feeling of suffocation. So that's to explain why I was just so out of control with fear, just off the charts, when I could finally focus my eyes and saw these creatures standing over me. This was very close up and instantly, suddenly realizing, uh-oh, this ain't a hospital. And it was because of that feeling of suffocation, because of the dim lighting, feeling trapped, I rolled away from them. I tried to move. Oh yeah, it was another thing added to the panic. Trying to move and feeling like I just had to use a whole lot of force to even get my arm up. Like I just didn't have the energy, and I'm trying to get away from him. When I tried to hit him away, it was just more of a push than anything. And when it touched its chest, it fell back very easily. It seemed softer and lighter than I expected. But I was rolling away from it almost with the same motion, and this thing they had over my chest fell off. But I was just mainly riveted on them, just my attention totally focused on them because they were coming towards me. They were sort of extending their hands, and to me, that seemed very threatening. And that stare, these great big eyes just focused, drilling into me, it was just so terrifying. Those few seconds there of them approaching and me screaming, I backed away and bumped up against a shelf behind me, and there was a bunch of instruments, tools or something laying there, and I just grabbed the biggest thing there and started flailing through the air, making threatening sounds. Don't know how much they understood, but I think they got the idea that not to come any closer because they stopped. But, you know, they were standing there staring at me, and that had the most excruciating feeling. It gave me this squirmy feeling in my head that I didn't understand that at the time. But, you know, having a lot of time to think about it, I think that somehow their telepathic or mind control thing depends on, you know, a healthy normal brain. But because I'd been hit by this energy, that it had kind of scrambled the circuits and it wasn't working. So they were combining forces. I had a doctor at one of my talks say, you know, well, if this telepathic energy is being projected from the brain, says the eye sockets are actually the largest hole in the front of the skull. So maybe they were directing this that way. Because that was the focus of my nightmares for a long time after that. You know, it was always those eyes boring into me like that. And one of the medical tests I had when I was returned was an EEG. And because there was so much media frenzy, the doctor put me in there under an assumed name. So the technician that was doing this test, I had no idea that it was me or what had happened. And so that's kind of like what's called a double-blind test. The observer, the experimenter, is not going to be influenced by any expectations because they don't know anything about it. And he wrote in his report about this unusual pattern in the EEG. So that's some of the follow-up research we're going to do, is to have that done again, see if that pattern's still there, compare that original test with the results you would get on somebody who had been electrocuted or hit by lightning, something like that. And but I really think right there that was the reason I was out of control. Nothing special about my resistance or anything like that. Steve, one of the guys on the crew, he was bragging. The reason they didn't get me is because I was stronger mentally, and their telepathic stuff didn't work on me. I said, okay, Steve, if you say so. Well, you know, Steve and Alan both said that they thought it looked to them like I was in some kind of trance, like I was under outside control. And I said, well, no, it seemed to me like an impulse to me. I felt like, hey, I'm showing off for the crew. What a hot shot, you know. It seemed like my own idea. And they said, well, if they've got mind control, they can make you think it's your idea. So, you know, they got a point there. But, you know, I really do think it felt to me like my own thinking. But they, realizing that they weren't going to be able to subdue me, and even in that weakened state, being so much bigger than them, they decided they just take off. It wasn't helping. You know, the frenzy that was pushing me to, heck, that might have caused me to die of a heart attack or something right there. It's only after all these years that I figure out that possibly what was going on there was they didn't just take me aboard to torment me and do experiments on me and, you know, see what pain does to humans or any of that kind of stuff. That, you know, what actually happened here was very likely that when I raised up, I closed the distance. At that point, that was the closest I got to the surface of that craft, and that it was some kind of a discharge, a side effect of the propulsion system, or some kind of a charge that builds up in these things when they travel at high speed. Even one of the debunkers, one of his pet theories was when pilots see UFOs, it's because of this effect of an airplane flying through dry air will build up charges in the surface of the skin of the aircraft to actually millions of volts. And this has been documented, and that sometimes these charges will build up and spin around the aircraft, and the pilot thinks he's seeing a UFO, but that's kind of a ridiculous explanation in my view. It's true that these charges build up. As a private pilot, you know, we were always taught, you know, before you fueled the airplane, you would take this wire from the fuel truck and clip it to the craft to ground such charges, so you didn't get a spark that would ignite the fuel and set the plane on fire. So whatever happened there, this discharge was extremely powerful and maybe completely unexpected. Possibly, you know, cardiac arrest, maybe something worse, maybe totally fatal at that point. So it's probably a good thing that the crew didn't retrieve my body at that point. If, you know, the nearest hospital's over an hour away, none of those guys know CPR, you know, whatever happened to me would probably have been permanently fatal had it not been the aliens who took me aboard, I think, to revive me. And here I'm lashing out at them out of panic and fear, you know, irrational. But, you know, I tried to explain all the things that come together to increase my fear at that point. So when they left the room and went down this little passageway to the right, you know, I was afraid they'd come back, so I just went the other direction. And it was blind panic. It was kind of a mindless frenzy of just get me out of here any way I can. So it was real dimly lit and very cramped, so that I couldn't see very far behind me to see if they were pursuing, or very far ahead to you know what was I running into in that direction. But I came to a room where I could see some doorways. Now later I figured out that those doorways couldn't have, this is my nightmares, that these doorways couldn't have been an exit from the craft. And in my irrational state of fear, I was thinking that I could just open a door and drop to the ground and be back in the woods and join my crew. But I was looking for a way to open these doors. There was no kind of a knob or a button on the door themselves, so I went to the chair in the middle of the room there and see if any of those controls would open the doors. And it was a very strange kind of a room. I pieced together the layout like this, so it's obvious that a doorway would not have opened to the outside, but that was just what I was thinking at the time. And there was a star pattern that was visible either through the wall or projected onto the wall. Anyway, these points of light were emanating from the surface of the room, ceiling, walls, floor. And this seems very strange to me. Well, why would they need to see the stars if you would think it would be some kind of a digital calculation if they were navigating or something? Well, maybe it's just a coincidence that you could see the stars and it was just for the purpose of close quarters navigation. But for whatever reason, this whether this button pushing caused an intervention at that point, or it just coincidental that this man came in to take me out of there. And I didn't understand the purpose at first, but the fact that I was seeing what looked to me to be a human being was very reassuring immediately, after having seen these creatures. I'd never seen anything like that in my life, and to suddenly, be trapped in this claustrophobic space with them was just so terrifying. So when this man comes in and wants to take me with him, I'm only too happy to go, even though he's not answering my questions. Where am I? What are these things? He's not answering. But he had a helmet on his head, and I thought, well, maybe he can't hear me with that on, or can't talk with it on. So I went with him, and we went through this little passage, what I think was probably an airlock, out into this room. It was a very big space, much brighter lit. Just as soon as the door opened, it was just painfully bright, like in comparison to the interior of that craft. And there were some other disc-shaped craft that were more rounded, less angular than the one we came out of. But he seemed to be in a hurry, and he was rushing me along. I was weak and unsteady on my feet, so I was mostly paying attention to not falling down and, where's he taking me? I don't know whether this room was part of like an airplane hangar, like a building, or if it was part of a larger craft, like what they call mothership or something, Could be either one. I couldn't see through these doors, windows, that were giving off light like sunlight. Like if the sun was shining on a translucent panel, or maybe there was some kind of a fixture that was designed to generate natural light. But there was no like window out to see outside, whether this was on the surface of a planet or under the water or out in space or what. But he took me out of this big room, down a hallway, and he took me and left me in the room with some other people who were dressed like him, and except for the helmet. So I thought, well, maybe they'll answer my questions. Just at first, just assumed they would. And so I started babbling. I was in total panic. I was hysterical. I was out of control. It could have had something to do with them not trying to converse with me, but I got no response. And so I became suspicious that this was even a rescue. What's going on here? And they were trying to get me to lay down on this table, and I was resisting. but they were so much stronger than me. I mean, even if I wasn't in a weakened condition, they probably would have won that wrestling match. But because of my panic, I was able to get one hand free for a few seconds when they put this mask over my face, and I got my finger under the edge of it and was almost to pull it away before, boom, I was unconscious. Some kind of a gas mask. Now, in hindsight, I think that if they were, at the time it was happening, I was thinking this was like an intervention. I was being rescued from these quote monsters. But it might have been a more cooperative sort of thing. Who knows? Whether that was forced or not. I didn't see them together at the same time, but it may be that human-looking beings, whether they were from some Earth-based agency or just a species that happens to look a lot like humans, I don't know, but they would be in a better position to complete the medical treatment, the repairs, whatever was wrong with me, because I definitely still had that feeling of being mortally wounded, like something was very wrong inside. And so my thinking after 40 years was that this was more of an ambulance call than an abduction. I kind of accept the term abduction. That's just kind of a loose word for having been taken aboard. But, at this point, with that understanding, I guess I'd have to be grateful that it happened. I certainly didn't feel that way at the time. This was horrific. I was so traumatized beyond belief. When I woke up, it was cold outside and dark, and there was a light above me. I looked to see where the light was coming from. And, the artist did the best he could with what it looked like, but it was actually kind of went off just as I looked. So I don't know whether a hatch closed or there was some kind of a light fixture that was turned off or whatever. But it was only there for a second after that, shot up into the sky quietly. It wasn't making the sound that the one in the woods made. The one in the woods was generating the weirdest sound. It was vibrating the whole truck. The crew was saying that it was, you could feel it in the steering wheel, Mike said. The guys, put their hand on the truck. It was off the range of human hearing on the high end and the low end with all kinds of like alternating frequencies that, when you hear a sound that's, goes up in frequency until it's out of your hearing range, it kind of has a funny effect as it, moves into that higher range. The same thing with the super bass low frequency that was vibrating the truck. You were feeling it in your body as much as you were hearing it with your ear. And it gave a very sort of an intimidating, sort of powerful feeling. That was part of what made it look so awesome, the feeling of energy that was coming from it. And the guys in the truck said that right before that beam hit me, that said it seemed like something was about to happen. It was like there was a charge building up, the kind of thing that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And so I think that was an accident, but a very unfortunate accident. I could recognize this stretch of road. I saw the lights of the town down below. And even though it was dark, and my most recent memory was a state of total panic, I felt this sense of relief and ran down towards the town. I got down there, pounded on the door of the first building with lights on, and nobody came. Either, this was the middle of the night I found out, but perhaps no one was up at that hour, or perhaps They thought there's a crazy man out there. We better not go answer the door. But I was yelling and pounding. But I went on down across the next bridge and came to a row of telephone booths. I went in, picked up the phone. It was out of order. You know, I felt like I'd used up my last ounce of strength. But I went into the next one, and it worked. And people say, well, you know, did you put in money or something like that? That's not the way the phones were there at that time. You could just pick it up, and if you wanted to talk to the operator, you could talk to the operator. And I did make a collect call to my relatives. And my brother-in-law thought it was another crank call. The family had been having prank calls. As soon as that hit the news media, isn't it crazy that there are people out there like that, you know? Something like that, and they're going to go torment the family and call them up and say all kinds of stupid stuff. You know, here the family is grieving, you know, that maybe somebody's dead, maybe we'll never see him again, and they got to be ha funny, you know, call up and make jokes. Well, my brother-in-law says, I think you got the wrong number. You know, like he was going to hang up. I screamed at ground, it's me, you know, and I convinced him it was me, and he's kind of hesitant, but he says, okay, I'll get your brother and come and get you. I thought, my brother, you know, he's in Phoenix, that's, you know, 3 hours away. I didn't understand because I thought it was still the same night. When they come and picked me up, my brother said something about what my mother had been through in those days of the search, and I didn't understand. He said, Travis, feel your face. And you know, I could feel that I had a 5-day growth of beard. And then I looked at my watch, and the date had changed. And for some reason, you know, I'd been trying to get it out and tell him what I had been through, but at that point, I just couldn't even talk anymore. I just kind of went catatonic. And so they went back, you know, took me to my mom's, and they siphoned some gas out of some other vehicles. All the gas stations in town were closed at that hour. And my brother decided that he wasn't going to turn it over to the sheriff. They'd been getting some calls that were pretty ominous. This one lady said that she had been a nurse working in a hospital where an old couple had encountered a UFO, and they were in pretty bad shape over it. When she came back on shift the next shift, that couple was gone, their records were gone, and everybody saying, no, that never happened, you know, and so she was saying, just be careful who gets a hold of them, because they're going to try to erase this. And the same thing with a call from a guy that said he had been employed by the CIA. He was retired. He said, I'm old now, but he said, just be careful who gets a hold of him. And so, you know, my brother didn't want to turn him over to the sheriff. There was a kind of a hostile relationship there on account of the accusations of murder. And of course, the sheriff was posturing to the world media. I mean, he was getting calls from all over the world, you know, that, you know, he's not accepting this, you know, this is a murder or whatever, you know. So there was no turning me over to the sheriff. And his main concern was, this guy's got to get some medical treatment right away. And, you know, he did his own examination on me there. He reported some of the stuff that he'd found to the doctor that he brought me to the next morning. And it was a madhouse. It was a battle of the media, the UFO skeptics immediately, you know, bombarding with accusation after accusation. It was just ridiculous. Some of the stuff was just so easily disproved. If they had just done a little checking, it was not that big a deal. But they'd put it out there just because, you know, they wanted to have something to say. And I wasn't talking, you know. I was hiding out from the media. So then they start saying, oh, Walton has not spoken to the media. This casts doubt on the report. Well, and then as soon as I did start talking, oh, he's talking to the media. It must be a publicity stunt. So damned if you do and damned if you don't. But, you know, I was in no shape to talk to anybody. You know, I could barely talk. I couldn't even hardly finish a sentence. When the sheriff finally did learn, my brother told him, So the sheriff came down and interviewed me, and I could, hardly finish a sentence. So the doctors did a preliminary medical exam there at my brother's house, and then put me in for these other various tests, x-rays and EEG and EKG and all sorts of things. But immediately, one of the things that the debunkers were trying to say is he didn't really experience this, he just thinks he did. He was hallucinating on drugs. So they put blood and urine samples through the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's drug screen, which proved there was no trace of any drug in my body, which should have put it to rest right there. But that thing, that lasted for years. People would come out with that to try to explain it away. But even on the face of it, I thought it was silly that they would think that would be a logical explanation, because if you have 7 people seeing the same thing, even if they were all on drugs, they're not going to have the same hallucination. It was just ridiculous. So one of the things that when my brother examined me right after my return was finding a red spot on my arm. And the doctor examined that and put this in his report, that it was partially healed. He called it a 2-millimeter red spot. And the most significant thing was it was not over any major blood vessel. But the skeptics, this fueled their accusation that it was a drug hallucination, claiming that LSD was being injected into the vein. I think that's kind of silly. I don't think anybody takes LSD by injecting it into themselves. But anyway, medical tests proved there was nothing to that. And, the other kinds of accusations that the hypnotist, Dr. Harder, had planted these memories in my brain, but the whole hypnosis was observed by 3 psychiatrists, a whole team of reporters. My brother was there. There were no leading questions of any kind. But again, even if he was able to make me think this happened, what about the other 6 guys? He wasn't hypnotizing them. This report, was coming from all these independent witnesses. It was so horrific to try to deal with the memory of what had happened, and then to face this onslaught of them digging into every little thing I did or somebody claimed I did. It's kind of like somebody who runs for office who suddenly they start digging up dirt, everything they can possibly find, and so it was a battle, but I took every single accusation, theory that the skeptics put together and laid out the proof how these things could not possibly explain what happened. And all at the same time trying to cope with the memory of what had happened. One theory was that this call from this phone booth never happened, that I was really off somewhere else. And this Philip class, I was seriously claiming that, even though when I made that call, the operator listened in, which is illegal, but I'm glad she did. She called the sheriff and told him about it, and he sent a deputy out there to dust for fingerprints and all that. But it was the middle of the night, so the deputy didn't get there before my family got there. But that theory was disproved by the fact that the telephone company knew that call came from there. And for that reason, these phone booths are still there. There's no phone booths anywhere left on that mountain. There aren't any public payphones. Everybody's got a cell phone. But that's kind of a local landmark. And it's kind of protected. It doesn't work anymore. They're not connected. You can't make a phone call out of there. But it's still right there in Heber, next to what used to be an Enco station, which later became Exxon. But now it's a Mexican restaurant. And it's right there between the restaurant and the Heber Tire Shop. But I'm working on getting some parts. My brother there, he really put himself out there for me. I mean, during those days, he was taking the brunt of attacks right and left, and I wouldn't have survived that without him. If I'd have been interrogated by the sheriff or the media at that time, I couldn't have. I would have crumbled. I would have fractured. He's passed away since then, but. He was my best man at my wedding here in this picture. That's why he's wearing a flower. It's not his normal attire. He was a horseshoe or farrier, and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization was a very large organization, oldest and largest at that time, bigger than MUFON. Walt Andrus was head of MUFON at the time, but this is Jim Lorenzen, who brought in people like Dr. Harder and Dr. Kandel and all these, Dr. Leo Sprinkle, who did the psychiatric testing. You can see one of the theories to explain this away was the temporary insanity thing, but it gave me a whole battery of psychological tests, which proved to be totally normal. Traumatic, but normal. And Dr. Alan Hynek, astronomer, University of Chicago in Illinois, and he was the principal figure in Project Blue Book. He's most famous for the term, coining the term swamp gas, but his years of looking into the subject after that, he very much repented from that and was pro-UFO towards the end of his life. He actually moved from Illinois out to Phoenix, Arizona, and I was with him during those years too. What came to light later was this UFO skeptic had been investigated by the FBI. And through the Freedom of Information Act, we come into possession of this memo from J. Edgar Hoover himself to the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. See, right now we know who the director of the CIA is because nobody cares. They put their name on the news. But back then that was secret, so they would just say Director of Central Intelligence Agency. But they were turning the investigation of Philip Klass over to the CIA. And there's other documents in the file showing that the FBI was maintaining this case in kind of the FUC, some kind of a status that means we can prosecute him for this later, but we're not acting on it now. So this is a standard CIA recruiting tactic, is to get something you can prosecute somebody for, and then you can kind of get control of them. And so that explains the ferocity of this guy and the intensity and the kind of money he was spending. He offered the youngest guy in the crew $10,000 to discredit the incident. And this bribe offer was actually carried by one of the local deputies, Deputy James Click, carried that message over there and delivered that. And so it can't be disputed that this offer was made. And he even referred to it in one of his books. And if he really doesn't believe that this happened, why does he need to pay somebody $10,000 to discredit it? And where's he getting the money? I think it came from the CIA. But this file is full of all kinds of really interesting stuff, and if for those of you who got a copy of that Travis film, there's a lot more material about the government connection, which is suspected back at that time, but after he passed away, we got all this documentation. And these are some quotes from the file. These are quotes from the FBI. He's well known to us, deficient on all points of his arguments. particularly concerning the credentials of Dr. Hynek. He attacked Stan Friedman the same way, just making up stuff, you know. He was a propagandist. He has no such sterling reputation and has twice been under FBI investigation in connection with the unauthorized publication of classified information. His previous communications generally have been accusatory or argumentative in nature. And if you've ever read his stuff, it is just propaganda. It was kind of funny. They got a letter that he had written, indicated the writer is most likely not in full possession of his faculties. So the FBI basically thought he was a wacko, you know. BUFile, which is an abbreviation for Bureau File, 6 blah blah blah, serial 7. In view of Class's intemperate criticisms and often irrational statements he made to support them, it was recommended that the Bureau be most circumspect in any future contacts with him. In other words, you've got to be careful what you say, because he's going to twist it and use it to malign you to the public. And this one near the bottom, third from the bottom, from time to time come to our attention by virtue of the fact that he has been, and they redacted 9 lines. Now, normally they use black, but they just cut it out. It was all white, you know, I guess that uses so much ink. But, and not to be of assistance to his government. That's the key phrase there that shows that this manipulation of him in the service of the government to discredit UFOs is right there, that not to be of assistance to his government. And they're covering up 9 lines. What would they do? Well, what are they hiding there, you know? Why isn't that being declassified? They were claiming it couldn't be declassified for purposes of prosecution. That was the reason they kept, not the reason they kept it in RUC status, because, you know, they can prosecute anybody for a breach of security. I mean, they wouldn't be able to prosecute anybody if not being able to talk about it in court was the problem. They just swear everybody to secrecy. There's special courts for that, and they do it that way. But that was what was going on with this character. It was quite an organized plan to discredit it. And here's some of the cross sections of the tree growth that I was telling you about, where you can see that the thickened growth is on the side towards where the craft was. It's very uneven. And also, you can see that it kicks in at the number of tree rings. So you get 1 tree ring for each year. That's the way it grows. And this was the test, the core sample that was taken 15 years after it happened. And you can see very clearly by the thickness of these rings, there was an abrupt increase in the thickness. And this was on the side of the tree towards where the craft was. Now, Ken Peterson, he was the crewman that was sitting next to me in the front. And when I got out, I left the door open. And he has since developed skin cancer on that arm. So I'm wondering if maybe that might not have been a factor, because, you know, he didn't get any sort of corrective medical treatment like I maybe did. And this is the calculation, you know, because a tree is actually a tall cone rather than a cylinder. You use the formula for a cone in geometry to calculate the amount of wood fiber. But some of these fiber materials from these trees have been subjected to laboratory analysis from Pinelandia Labs and some of the crop circle researchers have done this. This is just kind of a curiosity thing. I found this deal with it divided the state of Arizona up into areas, and it turns out that the incident happened in what was labeled Area 51. So it's just, maybe the map makers had a sense of humor there, but there were a lot of coincidences that came up that sure make you wonder. Like, on the left is D.B. Sweeney on the set of the thing. On the right is my son. And my son came with me to a conference, and people said, "Oh, you brought DB Senior with you," you know. And well, yeah, I guess so, you know. They both had the same light blue eyes, and it's so very similar looking. Lots of coincidences that I'm sure make you wonder. You know, I've been eager to get into what does all this mean? What's the bigger picture? You know, what's going on here? I've talked to some of you individually about this over the past couple of days, but the skeptics at that time were very fond of saying, well, if there was anything to this, if there was any UFOs, they would just land and say, here we are, people of Earth, you know. But, you know, they are obviously not doing that. But I point out that with that level of technology, they are capable of doing everything that they're doing here and remaining completely undetected. There'd be no ufology. It's not like they're stupid, like, oh, well, slipped up again. A human spotted me again today, darn it. You know? It's always this measured thing where each of us has this experience. We see this thing. We're certain we experienced it, but it's never documentable enough in a way to where we can go to the rest of the world and say, here's what happened. And I think there's a good reason for that not happening, and I think there is something akin to what they have in science fiction with the idea of a prime directive or a non-interference directive, that it would be harmful. It'd be destructive. And, you know, you can picture what would happen if you know, everybody was certain tomorrow that there's, you know, people or beings here that could lend us some technology tomorrow. We never have to pay for gas again. And that a lot of people think, oh, well, with disclosure, that would be great. We'd have 0-point energy and all this great technology come our way. But I think, you know, we have to think a little deeper than that. If it happened that abruptly, it would be extremely disruptive, extremely destructive. The world economy is based on petrodollars. And, you know, as much as we would like to have free energy, and we do need to get there, it needs to be done in some sort of a gradual way where we're weaned off it in a way where it doesn't result in the kind of chaos that would, you know, a lot of people would die. I mean, it would cause very serious consequences. The idea, you know, it took me years to figure out, you know, their intentions. You know, people talk about the alien agenda and the singular, but it could be plural. But generally speaking, I don't think it's harmful. And, you know, that's no judgment I would, you know, make hastily, you know. Potentially you'd think, well, they could annihilate us. We could be gone tomorrow if we miscalculate that. But, you know, Michio Kaku is a physicist that was on TV, and he says, people keep imagining these civilizations out there as possibly being a few hundred years ahead of us. So based on the age of these star systems, they could be millions of years ahead of us. Everything technological that we have, we've developed in the last 200 years. That's a blip in time. And, you know, where will we be in 2,000 years? And they could be 2 million years ahead. So for our scientists to say, oh, they could never do that, or they could never do this, they can't get here in that much time, it's just really silly to me that, you know, they can make those kind of pronouncements. And probably one of the propaganda successes of the 20th century is the idea that to think that there's another civilization out there is a kooky idea. I'll tell you, what's kooky is to think there isn't. You know, we have all this we have all this data with astronomy. They've back then, the skeptics were saying, well, there might be life way out there somewhere, but they'd never find us. We'd be like a grain of sand on the beach, The universe is so devoid of habitable planets that they could never locate us. Well, we have this thing called the Hubble telescope, and we've already identified literally dozens of Earth-like planets. We know where they are and what star they're going around, and that's with our relatively primitive technology. So, even back in 1975, they had this thing called the Drake equation, but the values that we would plug in that based on today's science are much different than they were back then. The number of civilizations just in the Milky Way galaxy alone is astronomical, no pun intended. It's a huge number of such civilizations. And for these so-called scientists to act like it's laughable to think that they would come here, I think it's laughable to think they wouldn't, and not just like they just arrived. I mean, good grief, they've known about us when we were still, basically coming out of the cave, and that's additional to my point about them not being malevolent, not having sinister intention. If they wanted this planet, they'd already have it. We'd never know what hit us. That kind of technology is not something where you're going to fight it out with fighter jets in the skies, It's no contest. It'd be like attacking an aircraft carrier throwing rocks, It's just absurd to think that they're evil and the only reason they're hidden from us is because they have some sinister plan for us. I really don't think so. I think the reason they're hidden is because to protect us from ourselves and our own reaction to it. But additionally, I think that's the beneficial thing, the good thing about events like this one. And the reason I'm still talking about it. I'm living on a pension from the steelworkers union. This stuff doesn't pay for itself. It's a mission. The reason I'm talking about it is because I think it's important that people realize what happened to me is an aspect of something that's very real. It's non-threatening, but the only thing to be feared about the truth of this is our own reaction to it. And so the education that comes out of events like this is preparing us in a way to where this transition from not knowing to knowing about it is a beneficial thing. Grant Cameron and some other researchers have pointed out that sometimes aliens make particular individual contact in a way that seems to be an inspiration, an intention to nudge us forward in gently, tiny increments in a beneficial way, but nothing in some grand sweeping way that's going to be destructive. And the same thing with these sightings, we're allowed to see them. I used to think when people would describe their sighting and they'd say, oh, it was kind of like reacting to me. It seemed like it knew I was there. And I thought, being egotistical, like you're the center of all this. I think you're just a bug on the ground and you just happen to see it. But no, I really do think that they show themselves, that this is actually a display, a deliberate thing. And you as the witness, they knew you were watching, and you may have even been picked, maybe even picked for a particular reason. That's pretty far leap forward for me, but I really do think that they have an overall plan that's beneficial to us, and getting accustomed to the idea that we're not alone in the universe, that there's nothing supernatural about this. We need to really be careful about that approach to these beings from way out there, to neither deify nor demonize. They're just those people from way over there that we don't know too much about. And they certainly know a lot about us. So that's the reason I'm still talking about it. But I don't want to take up all the time with what I have to say, because I know some of you people have questions, and there's never enough time to get it all in, because there's a lot of stuff being discovered along the way that you can't put it all into one presentation. There's my website up there for people. The reason I'm talking about that right now is because I had books that were supposed to come here that didn't arrive, so I'm all sold out. So what I've been doing is just taking orders. And normally you'd go to the website and then pay the shipping, but anybody who pays and orders here, I'll give them free shipping. And there's also more information on the website for people who are interested. But I want to open it up to questions, because a lot of that is sometimes, even after 40 years, I get questions that nobody thought of yet. So, anybody got a question? Oh, you're kidding. Yeah?
All right. Hang on. Who's got a question? I'm sorry. Okay. If anybody else has questions, we've got a few minutes for questions before we need to break. If you want to line up over there, I'll move over to the X in just a second so we can get you on film.
Hi, Travis. I just wanted to know what you saw in the craft, like what you remember seeing when you were either woke up there or came off the table.
No, what was that?
She'd like to know what you remember from what you saw inside the craft.
Well, the interior of the craft looked sort of metallic, sort of a matte, non-reflective metallic. I don't know that it was metal, but there weren't cracks or rivets or screws. It was very smooth, unbroken surface, very dimly lit, a very diffuse lighting. And I think that kind of coincides with the very large eyes. Most creatures on Earth that have very large eyes like that are nocturnal or live in a cave or under deep sea in low light conditions. And so I think that was why it was so dim inside there.
Some of the other people that have discussed being taken by aliens have said that this has happened repeatedly. Has this ever happened to you again? Have you ever been taken again?
Well, I've always tried to stick to the things that I can document. There's some really interesting things that happen that I don't talk about because, it seems it actually detracts from credibility. And credibility is important in my case because my mission is to convey to the general public the reality of this. And how they say extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. I think the idea that we're alone in the universe is an extraordinary claim, but to throw it back on them. But there is one incident that I can report. I was in L.A. at a MUFON meeting in Burbank. And Jan Harzen had recently become the head, and he spoke there, and Tracy Torme, the screenwriter on Fire in the Sky, spoke. But when we left there, we were headed up the 5. We were going to hit the 10 and come across into Arizona. And we saw these lights coming towards us, and the closer it got, the more astonishing it was. This craft was gigantic. I mean, it's astonishing to think that something a quarter of a mile across can fly that fast and stop that quickly. But it came, and when it stopped right over the top of us, it sort of tipped up a little bit. So I'm thinking that maybe these lights, there was one on each corner, were actually some kind of propulsion, and that they had to sort of turn the propulsion in the direction they were traveling in order to stop. But it also turned at that point, and these lights, turned 90 degrees before it headed off towards the Pacific, which shows me that there's a front and a back, so it can't just go in any direction. But I wouldn't even tell you about that because there was only me, my girlfriend, and my son there. But My other son, after we got back the next morning, looked it up. He found a website I'd never heard of called UFOstalker.com. And there was a whole slunge of reports of people that saw the same thing at the same time. It's set up like on a map, and they put the sightings in a circle with a number. And so even at that time, there was like 20 of us that saw it. And I'm thinking, man, a city like LA, there had to have been hundreds. But how many people would bother to report it? How many people would know about this website? So and how many people would report it immediately? Maybe there were more reports as the week went on of that same incident. So I'm going to follow up on that and see how much. And then I'm going to, once I can nail the date down, put something out there on Facebook to see how many other people saw it. There's probably a very huge number. But you had a question. Try to get to as many as we can.
Yes. Thank you for coming here. My question is, did you have a feeling of the passage of time while you were in the spaceship? Did you know you were going to exit it? And with your exit, how far were you from the place that they picked you up?
Now, this conscious period that came out under hypnosis, the main thing that was achieved there was to separate this incredible fear. I couldn't even finish a sentence before then, to relate what happened. Dr. Harder found that there was a block, that there were additional memories, that it could be fatal if they tried to penetrate that. And the researchers at that time were skeptical that was anything more than a bluff, a threat to keep you from, trying to probe into that. But I think there was a legitimate reason for that, because in this case, there was a period of time in which I was probably at least in cardiac arrest. So if you regress somebody hypnotically through a period of time in which they're clinically dead, you might cause that. And you're not going to bring them out with hypnosis because they're no longer conscious. So we really hesitated to follow up and try to do further hypnosis. Now, you were saying about the consciousness of time. This conscious period, I don't know where in the 5 days that this happened. It probably, I would guess, was fairly close to right after I was hit, because I was still feeling all of these effects. But it may have taken some time to revive me to that extent. So I don't know how much time that would have been, whether it was, within an hour or within days or whatever. But the additional healing and medical treatments, whatever, probably took a considerable amount of time after that. But like I said, I only recalled enough time that, to me, I thought it was still the same night when my brother picked me up, and he said, "Travis, you've been gone for 5 days." So that was quite a shock at that point.
How far were you when you exited the spacecraft from where they picked you up?
The place where I was returned was about 15 miles away. They didn't, fortunately, dump me back where I was taken. I would have froze to death before I could get help. But they also didn't take me to my hometown. Snowflake is in this big, wide, shallow valley where there's just no place that they could descend in a place where they wouldn't be in view of hundreds of people. But Heber, the town nearest where this happened, is hidden down in this canyon with cliff edges. There's this intersection of several canyons. And so once they, were up here and could see for miles, there was no trucks coming down the highway or anything. Once they were below and down there over the highway, they would be out of view of anybody except maybe, to see that I made it to the phone booth.
Mine's quick. Did you come back with any senses enhanced?
Of enhancement? Oh, well, that was something I was really reluctant to reveal for a long time because I couldn't document it. But finally, I went in and got the documentation, the printout from my employers, so I could prove that I had never called in sick in 40 years. So it's possible that, that was a result of some of the treatments that I underwent. It could be because I try to live healthy, but that was something I can talk about because I can document it. Thank you.
This is going to have to be the last one. I'm sorry, guys. Thank you.
So after you had lost all the memories of it, how long did it take until you realized you needed to regress and get the hypnotherapy to recover the memories?
Well, the hypnotherapy, hypnotic regression was within days, and that was basically just to chronicle and record what had happened and to separate the fear. And that really did give me a certain amount of relief from that point on. It wasn't until the movie came out and I started doing interviews about it again that I started having a different kind of dream. Right after it happened, it was nightmares, the pictures of those eyes boring into me. But then, along about that time, the dreams were about the human-looking ones. And there wasn't so much fear involved with that. But I went to the screenwriter on Fire in the Sky and I said, what do you think? Do you think that maybe some of these dreams I'm having are like memories leaking back through? And he goes, nah, it's probably just because you're doing these interviews. So I asked him again recently and he goes, oh no, that was probably memories coming back to you. So he kind of changed his opinion. But nothing major to report in that department. It seems dangerous to probe into it. It might be that when the time is right, it'll come back spontaneously, or maybe I'll never recover that. But I would like to say, because we're out of time, that if you'll come to my table down there in the vendor room, I can answer further questions. So, thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate you listening.